Good evening. This is a regular meeting of the Princeton Planning Board. It's Thursday, December 6, 2018, and the opening statement is as follows. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posting the 2018 agenda resolution of the regularly scheduled meetings of the Princeton Planning Board. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board of the Princeton Municipal Complex and is to be maintained throughout the year by transmitting a copy of such schedule to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, The Times, Trentonian, and Comcast Media. A copy has been filed with the Clerk of Princeton on the 8th day of December 2017. Legal notice on the adoption of said resolution appeared in the December 15, 2017 edition of the Princeton Packet. Could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Capizoli? Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Quinn? Mr. Stankiewicz?
Yes.
Mr. Texarney?
Here.
Mrs. Ullman?
Here.
Mr. Williamson?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
Here.
Mrs. Gunning?
Here.
Ms. Sachs? Mr. Oakman? We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have one announcement, but before I do that, I'd like to say that Dwayne Williamson isn't sure, but he feels this may be his last meeting as a member of the planning board, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank him for his service to the board and for all the contributions he's made throughout the year, and I hope you'll all join me in giving him a round of applause as he moves on.
Thank you very much. Well, it's just been great being here under the leadership of Wanda and Gail and Jerry, our great board attorney. And I saw the accolades he just received. Out of everyone else heard it.
I don't have enough words. I don't. I wish I had more great words about Jerry.
But it's well deserved. And I just want to thank the other members of the board, board secretary and everything for just all the great work. It's just been great being here. And I guess I'm moving on to other things, so I'll be affecting the board from another position as my status is changing. But thank you.
Okay, the other announcements are on December 8th, that's this Saturday, from 10 a.m. to 12 noon, and on December 10th, which is Monday, right?
Yes.
Okay, from 7 to 9 p.m. there will be neighborhood meetings in Erdman Hall. This is about the redevelopment project. So these are public meetings, especially for the residents of the area, but I believe others who are interested can attend. Is that right, Mrs. Ullman?
Yes.
So let's move on to resolutions. You've been sent the 2019 annual calendar, and you've checked all the dates, and they really are Thursdays. Good. Are there any comments on that? Okay, could I have a motion to adopt the annual calendar?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
This is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And the second is a request for a professional services agreement. This is LRK Incorporated. This is for planning services for the redevelopment plan. And I believe you were sent an outline of what this is going to cover. So are there any questions, comments? Jim Constantine is here if you have questions about the contract. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion for the professional services agreement.
I move approval of the agreement. Gail?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. The next item is a discussion item. This is a request for extension of Princeton Center's designation, and you should have received information on this. This is sort of tentative because we have to wait until things fall in line in Trenton for this.
See, Mrs. Gunning, we just received an email late this afternoon. It seems that the state has extended our designation until June 30th, 2019. So this resolution isn't necessary at this time. We just got the email, so we don't have to take an action. Thank you.
So we'll table that, and you've all learned something that will happen next year.
No.
There might actually be a state planning commission by then.
I'll hold my breath.
That would surprise all of us. All right, that brings us to the hearings for this evening. The first one is Fox and Fox Development LLC. This is continued from November 1st of this year, and it's a minor subdivision with variances. It's 29 Snowden Lane, Block 7601, Lot 4. And let's see. I believe when we stopped this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, there were some questions about what the footprint of the development would be like, whether we could possibly save some of the woodlands, what sort of drainage calculations we should see for it. Did you want to tell us what you've done in the meantime?
Good evening, Madam Chair, and good evening, members of the board. I want to wish everyone a happy holiday. Madam Chair, you are correct. There were a couple of issues. The night was getting late back in November 1st, and some more information was requested by the board. We have provided that information. The issues that still had to be worked out were whether it was to be a conservation easement to save the stand of trees on the corner of the lot 402, and we are granting that conservation easement. One has been placed upon the plan that has been provided to the township. It's a 25-foot wide rectangle that does take care of the conservation easement. I have with me again tonight Walter Hopkin, our engineer, James Kyle, our planner, and I also have one of the applicants. They are here tonight too to provide testimony should you require it. So we do have the conservation easement saved as was requested. There's some back and forth with the township staff with regard to some of the grading issues on lot 402. We are willing to work with staff on that, but again, that grading is being done in order to save some usable yard area for any occupant of the house. There was a request to shift the boulder retaining wall closer to the property line on lot 401. We have agreed to do that. The driveway turnaround areas, there's a request to either eliminate them or buffer them with trees. We have agreed to buffer them. There was a request that there be a private walkway from the sidewalk to the house on lot 401. We have agreed to do that. Paver pad for trash enclosures. We've agreed to do that for both homes. We've also provided, we have a footprint and elevations. Elevations are provided. We have them here with us tonight. We can put them up on the screen as well. There was a request that we do a stormwater plan pursuant to the major subdivision ordinance, and we've agreed to do that, along, of course, with the tree survey that would go with the conservation easement. So everything we've been requested to do, we have done. We can provide the testimony and present exhibits on everything that's been requested.
Before the applicant continues, I just wanted to indicate one thing. I understand that Jane Manners and maybe other members of the public have sent emails to members of the planning board. If you've gotten them and have not read them, please don't read them. If you've gotten them and have read them, please disregard them. They should not be given any consideration during the hearing. The only evidence that should be considered during the hearing is that which is presented at the hearing. So if Ms. Manners wants to make any kind of presentation, she's certainly welcome to.
Board members, you've heard what's been done so far. Did you have any questions or comments on this?
I do have some questions about a few of the items you mentioned, but I guess I was wondering if are the staff gonna, are the professionals going to do any kind of presentation, or?
Yes, we will do whatever the board would like us to do. If you'd like us to do a presentation, we'd be glad to do so.
I mean, or I could jump right into my questions either way.
We created some really cool exhibits, so I'd love to show them to you.
Okay, let's see them.
All right, thank you. I'd like to call Walter Hopkin again. I know he's been qualified.
Okay.
Yep, I'll go ahead and take. Mr. Hopkin, you remain remain sworn. I know you're providing a new exhibit. Madam Chair, with your permission, the attorney's position, I would like to be able to provide these to the board members. We also have it up on the easel.
Sure.
Mike, those are copies of what's on the easel?
These are copies of what is up on the easel.
Okay, so that'll be Exhibit A4.
A4.
A4 is a color rendered version of the plans that were submitted to the board, last revised November 20th, 2018.
Okay. All right, Mr. Hopkin, if you could just explain what you've done since the last meeting on November the 1st with regard to A4, and everything else that's been submitted.
Sure. In addition to what Mr. Herbert had indicated we've agreed to, since the last meeting, the layout and the footprints of the homes have been revised. You'll notice that the footprint along Snowden Avenue has been moved away from the intersection. That's to allow that stand of trees to remain and to be placed in a 50-foot wide conservation easement. We've also reduced the grading and clearing along that corner as well. There was also a request with the prior reviews to narrow the driveways at the road, which we've done as well, to 10 feet. And as Mr. Herbert indicated, there's also a K-turn that's been provided along the towards the home, which we would propose to buffer. The garages have been set back architecturally greater than 16 feet in accordance with your proposed ordinance. We've also added rain gardens for each one of the homes along the front to capture the driveway runoff. We've also proposed roof leader recharge, so the stormwater from the proposed homes will be directed into roof leaders and into the ground to be infiltrated into the soil. The combination of both of these complies with your major stormwater management ordinance, and we've provided a report to your professionals justifying that and indicating compliance. We've also added a plan to the set, a tree replacement plan, so we've identified the trees that would be removed. We've added a pad for refuse as previously requested, and shown the air conditioners along the side as requested as well. And that basically summarizes what we've proposed.
Any questions from the board with Mr. Hopkin?
Did you have anyone evaluate this stand of trees? Do we know anything about the age of the trees or the condition at all?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Gail?
I've got a few questions. The first one actually relates to something that you had said earlier about complying with the request to provide sidewalks connecting directly from the, or paths connecting directly from the houses to the sidewalk. Did I hear you correctly when you mentioned that? Because they're not shown on the plan.
Correct. So since our plan was submitted to your professionals, there was a request to connect the home along Snowden, the driveway, the service walk, to the existing sidewalk along Snowden. So that is not shown on our plans, but we've agreed to do that as a condition of approval to revise the plans.
And there is no sidewalk on Wheat Chief, is that correct?
No.
Correct.
Okay. A second question. There are a couple of trees on your tree protection plan that are shown as to remain. right in the middle of the area that's being significantly regraded to the side of the house on 4.02. And I don't think those trees will survive if you do the regrading as shown. And I don't think there's any reason really to do that regrading. I mean, I hear what you said about giving some usable yard space, but I think one of the things, you know, well, I'm not sure what you want the usable yard space for, but you can have a grassy area. I don't think it needs to be completely level.
So
And I would like to see a lot less regrading in that area.
we have, so I think there's 2 points there. One is the amount of grading that we're proposing, and that did come up, I think, in some initial feedback from your professionals. Lot 4.02, which is the home that's fronting on Wheatsheaf, has a rather narrow rear yard. So the thought there was to kind of provide a somewhat flattened side yard for recreational and enjoyment purposes. We do have 2 landscape architects on staff. We can evaluate those 2 trees to see if they can be saved and see if there's any way that we can do it with the proposed grading.
Okay. Well, that sort of brings me to the next, and probably the most serious question that I have, because you know, the stormwater calculations that you've done to show that there will be an improvement in the amount of runoff from this site, I don't believe typically the consideration of how many mature trees are being lost is incorporates the water storage capacity of those trees in determining how much runoff you're going to have. I'm guessing you just were looking at impervious coverage, but I think that we on the board are very concerned that, you know, you're talking about losing 16 or 18 trees if we assume that these 2 are going to die as well, or going to come out of the plan as well, which have storage capacities of, you know, hundreds of gallons of water that can really help with each. Thank you, Louise. Really help with the runoff mitigation. And if you haven't considered that in your stormwater calculations, I think that those calculations are not an accurate reflection of how it's actually going to impact the neighborhood in Harry's Brook.
So I think there's a question in there somewhere, and did we? So when we do perform the calculations, it's not just impervious versus pervious. There's a characterization that we make of the existing cover. So in this case, we would take that into consideration.
So the calculations that you've done have considered the fact that there are 18 mature trees that are being removed from the site. What's the characterization of the current site
So
versus the new site?
I don't have the entire report. I just have the summary with me tonight. But what I can tell you is there's a characterization of woods or wooded land. So what I'll do is I'll go back and check to make sure that we made that characterization of the existing conditions. And if we didn't, then what we will do is we'll increase the size of we'll revise the calculations to reflect that and increase the size of the stormwater management system.
And just remember, we have agreed, and we're not required to, but we have agreed to comply with your major subdivision stormwater requirements.
Actually, you are required. It's not major subdivision requirements, it's major stormwater plan, and you are required to comply with that. That's not an option. And that was in the engineering report from the very beginning.
We have agreed to comply with that.
Yeah, okay. So I have a couple of more detailed questions about the stormwater report. The first of which is, when I go through the tables that you have for discharge from the roof recharge system, discharge from the rain garden system, and discharge from the undetained portions of the site, I take your numbers and I add them up, and I get very different totals than what you have in your table that reflects the totals. And I'm wondering if you could take a quick look at that and tell me why there's a difference between those figures.
So as I indicated, I don't have the summary with me this evening.
It's in the summary.
Well, right, but that's just the summary, so I can't add them all up. And I don't know what specifically you're talking about, but my guess is that what happens when you do these calculations, it calculates the peak amount of runoff. Those peaks occur at different times, so as the water runs and it goes into a storage system, the discharge can occur at a different time than a direct runoff. So if you go further into the calculations, which I don't have with me, it adds them on a time basis.
Okay, so the discharge from the rain garden would be earlier than the discharge from the roof.
Actually, it would most likely be the opposite. The roof would probably run off quicker than the rain garden, which is held and stored.
Okay. Well, that actually does raise another question. I know what happens when you overflow your rain garden and the way that discharges. What happens when the capacity of the roof storage system is exceeded?
So we've designed it for up to and including the 25-year storm. Over and above that, what's proposed is a Y connection, so it would simply overflow between the 25 and the 100-year storm. It would overflow at the home. So where the connection is made to the underground system, we have a little Y connection, a little grate, so it would overflow in that area.
And then you get sheet flow.
Yes, and then sheet flow.
Can you tell me what the water quality design storm is? Because they represent in the report that rain gardens contain the entire water quality storm.
Right, it's a 1.25 inch per. It's a specified storm. That's the amounts and the time is specified by NJDEP.
And that's less than a 2-year storm.
Yes, it is. You're correct.
Okay.
It's DEP has chosen it to represent a fairly frequent event.
I guess the last question that I have is actually 2 more questions. The rain garden detail makes reference to the seasonal high water table and the fact that it should be 2 feet below the bottom of the modified soil. Do you have any idea what the seasonal high water table is on this property? Have you done any investigation?
We have not done the soils investigation yet, but we used the soils maps, which give a general depth to seasonal high.
Okay. And the last one is in terms of how I guess the question is, you've got a certain amount of discharge from the site with the existing conditions, the existing impervious coverage of the existing house located where they are. In your design calculations, you've just assumed the whole site should be treated as one when calculating the runoff from the proposed condition. But I'm curious whether that makes complete sense, because if you've got a lot of discharge from the site that's currently happening, say, flowing out to Snowden, and now you're adding a lot of new impervious coverage that's fronting on wheat sheaf, you may end up with a lot less discharge to Snowden, and because of the management tools you put in place, and a lot more discharge to wheat sheaf, so that the impacts in terms of the way it really impacts the neighborhood might be disadvantageous. Can you reflect on that?
Sure. I think the existing conditions show that the vast majority of the site does drain towards wheat sheaf. I would respectfully suggest that you look to your professionals to concur with that, but I think it's clear that most of this site drains towards wheat sheaf, which was our point of analysis.
Anybody else?
I do have some questions.
Yes, go ahead, Louise.
Can you, I should probably know this, but I don't. What are the 2 and 10 and 25 and 100-year storms? Do you know what those storms are, how they're defined? What's the 2-year storm, like 3 inches over 24 hours?
I do not have
versus-
that information with me. It's specified by NJDEP
Yeah.
as far as the rates, and I'm sure you know that the 2-year storm statistically occurs once every 2 years. The 10-year storm once every 10 years.
Well, yeah,
So on.
those numbers are out the window these days. I mean, I think everybody with climate change, that these are sort of make-believe not make-believe numbers, but they're recurring much more frequently. And do any of our own professionals, do you happen to know that, Jack?
Yeah, their calculations are based on inches per hour as opposed to inches in 24 hours.
Okay.
But for the 2-year storm, it's 4.6 inches per hour. For the 10-year, it's 6 inches per hour. For the 25, it's 6.9, and for the 100, it's 8.36.
Okay. Inches per hour.
Yes.
Wow, okay. Are the roof recharge systems, are those dry wells? Is that what we're talking about, or?
Basically, it's high-density polyethylene pipe encased in, wrapped in stone,
Okay.
perforated.
And so the infiltration happens down and laterally?
That's correct.
I don't really know how to look at one of those designs, so I can't intelligently talk about it, but I was concerned with the rain garden design that I saw, such as it is. It doesn't really look like a rain garden, and there are notes that talk about seeding it with the detention basin mix, which is very different from infiltration basin potentially. And I just wondered whether or not, those design considerations, whether you're looking to the DEP BMP manual, or, what's guiding your thinking about the sizing and design and planting medium and all of that stuff that
We did
is
use,
really, really critical to a rain garden functioning the way it needs
of course,
to.
we did use the NJDEP BMP manual. They refer to them, they have a section called bioretention systems, and that's what this falls under, and that's what we used. Sometimes with details, things get copied over from other jobs. I know that this is one from the previous one. I can check that seed mix. There are wet seed mixes, and there are dry detention basin seed mixes, so we can check that to make sure that we do have the appropriate seed mix there.
And just make sure that your seed mix, there are lots of different providers, I'm sure, but is native plants, and I know Prairie Nursery has a good one. We're probably not supposed to name names, but you get my point.
I understand, yes.
They do have some good mixes over there. I have used them.
Do we require a performance guarantee for green infrastructure systems? I'm just thinking in terms
For a
about.
single-family home, no, we don't.
Okay, so will the homeowner be responsible for maintaining and, monitoring and doing maintenance
Yes.
on the system? And so would they be provided with all of the instructions and guidance that they need?
Yeah, we haven't, just a couple of questions you asked. We haven't done our complete review of this. I did a cursory review, and they are meeting our requirements for major stormwater management. A couple of things. We would require some type of maintenance sheet that would go with this for both the rain garden and the dry well. With the dry well, we'd actually prefer to see some type of structure that you have access to, so if it ever did have to get cleaned out, like the old typical septic tank, we would, you know, as opposed to just a stone trench. So we would ask them for that. And as far as
So
the...
it would end up being sort of like a cistern instead of
Not a cistern. It basically is a dry well, but it's a structure that has a lid that you can access. So if it ever were to fill up with sediment or leaves or whatever, you have access to be able to clean it out.
Mm-hmm.
And the third item is the landscaping for the rain garden. We wouldn't want to see just a seed mix. We would want to see some type of plants in there, you know, larger plants, as opposed to just a seed mix. The concern with just a seed mix, it'll end up being mowed as their front lawn, and it really wouldn't serve the same purpose.
Absolutely true. There's good guidance in the Chapter 7 of the BMP manual about that
Yes.
stuff. And you're proposing 0 trees to replace the ones you're removing?
Well, I think we haven't shown any on our plans now. I think we wanted to provide the developer some flexibility as to whether they were going to place them on site or contribute.
Contribute to the tree fund?
Correct.
And the, I should probably know this too, but when the tree replacement, is that like a 2.5 or 3 inch caliper tree for
Yes.
every
Yeah,
tree you
there's
remove, no
tree
matter what size it is?
There are tree replacement regulations, and we will comply with them as far as replacement goes.
Yeah, and our replacements are 1-to-1 with,
It's not 1-to-1. It's
No.
based on the size of the tree. I think it's 1-to-1 up to 18 inches. Then it goes 2-to-1, 3. I think it. I don't know if it stops at 3-to-1 or 4-to-1, but
okay.
in the memos it says that they should comply with the shade tree ordinance. And again, we are going to want to see planting on site. If they can't do it they have to do at least half of the replacements on site. But if they can't, if it doesn't make sense to put them all on site, then they have the option of either, actually we've done it if in the neighborhood, if there's other areas in the neighborhood, or they would contribute $400 per tree to the Shade Tree Trust Fund.
Okay. Is there any protocol for consulting with neighbors about placement of trees within the neighborhood?
There's no protocol, but we encourage it. You know,
So
we
that's
talk to the
a
neighbors.
conversation that the applicant has with neighbors as
Yes,
opposed
and
to-
when it comes time to actually building, a lot of times the neighbors will contact either our office or the arborist, and we, you know, the developer typically works with us.
And we've already had several conversations with the neighbors about various subjects with regard to this application. We'd be glad to work with the neighborhood.
Okay.
Anyone else? Could I ask again about the conservation area with the trees? Are you contemplating the fact that this is going to be turned over to the township? Will it continue in the ownership of the lot that it's adjacent to? Or, I mean, what did you sort of have in mind as the arrangement for that?
It would be a conservation easement, so it would still remain under the ownership of that lot, but the easement would prevent any removal of any trees within that easement, and it would, of course, be deed restricted. Mr. Muller?
And I assume that the grantee would be the municipality.
Yes.
Every time I look at something like that and see that a major bicycle path goes along it, one that leads to a local school, I wonder who is going to undertake the obligation for the path on the other side of the woods here. I mean, what's adjacent to this is the Snowden Lane bicycle path, which is very, very important to the community. It has to be shoveled and so on, and that would continue to be the obligation of this homeowner as well as the
Yes.
the trees under the conservation easement. What?
I have another question.
Even without the conservation element, it would be the obligation of the owner
To continue.
and it looks like a big problem.
All right. Other questions? Or?
I do have one more, going back to the question of monitoring and maintenance of the rain gardens. under the town's stormwater permit, the MS4 permit, or any other DEP regulations, is the town required to inspect every stormwater management
Bless you.
installation, in the case of green infrastructure, rain gardens, after every storm event of a certain size? Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's for the major developments. Not, obviously, this is a major stormwater, but the ordinance at this point does not require, we actually have a permit, and the owner of the detention basin has to submit a report annually to the town, you know, explaining what maintenance they've done. We do periodically inspect them, but we require the owner to actually submit a report stating what they've done to maintain the basin. However, we have not done it yet for single-family homes. We talked about it, and I think at that point, everybody just wasn't ready to pull the trigger on doing it for single-family homes. That may be coming in the future. We wanted to at least get it done for all the major developments. So I think that, and I know we're going to be revisiting the stormwater ordinance early next year. That may be something to consider. But right now, it does not include single-family homes.
Yeah, these small-scale infiltration basins or bioretention basins are so powerful and so effective, but only if they're designed and built and maintained properly, right? I mean, I don't mean to sound like a school marm about that, but I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yep, no, we see that all the time.
And so for rain gardens, especially that are serving single-family homes, I think it would be a really good thing, whether it's in the ordinance or just our policy, to make sure they're inspected frequently early on, just to make sure they're functioning properly. Because if there was compaction, you know, when there shouldn't have been, if it was installed improperly or whatever, it's going to fail from day one, and then everybody's going to be upset, including the homeowner, and they'll mow it, and, you know, all the bad stuff happens.
So we do inspect the installation of it. And fortunately, I guess fortunately, we don't have a lot of rain gardens in town, so it's easy to do the periodic inspections. And they're easy to inspect. It's the dry wells, obviously, that's next to impossible to inspect.
Yeah.
That's why we at least want to have an access point to it.
Well, the DEP has just announced proposed rule amendments, stormwater rule amendments, that will require that all of the stormwater standards, the recharge and water quality and peak rate control, all must be met with green infrastructure for the water quality storm. My point is, when that finally is fully adopted and implemented, which will probably be a year and a half from now, we'll have a bunch more rain gardens in town. And so this issue of just, and it's, you know, the fact that they're distributed provides for a lot of redundancy, and hopefully it'll work really, really well. But this inspection, just making sure they're all working right, is going to be very important.
We'll be asking David and Dwayne for more manpower.
Bless you.
All right, I think I'm done.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. Did you indicate that the date of A4 was November 20th? Because I know that I see the date actually on the plan says December 4th.
I'm sorry, you're correct. They're based on.
That's right. I just
Yeah,
wanted
they're based on plans November 20th, but the actual exhibit is dated December 4th.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
All right, any other questions?
Just got a sort of a general question. What if an applicant, let's say theoretically we approve an application, right? And but then we find in practice that, let's say an applicant meets whatever ordinance is required for stormwater management, and let's say in practice we find out later on that it failed in a way because of how it's affecting neighbors, et cetera. What's our remedy for that?
I had one of those today. For the most part, I mean, if the builder is, the one I had to deal with, say, the builder is still there, so we're dealing with the builder to make the necessary corrections. If it happens 2 or 3 years later, we deal with the homeowner. I mean, we haven't had one happen yet where I'm dealing with a homeowner trying to fix a problem, but potentially that could happen. But it's a condition of the approval, so it stays with the property. So that homeowner is, they're obligated to, if it's, something is wrong with it, they would have to fix it.
Right, and I guess if they don't, then what happens?
They get a violation. Eventually, they would, if they don't, after the violation, don't fix, they would get a summons. It would go to court, and then the judge would decide.
Okay, and I presume there's, I'm not speaking as an attorney, but I presume maybe neighbors can possibly sue. I don't know. You never wanted to get to that level if they feel there's damage.
Right. If they're
To the
impacting
property,
a neighbor
right.
directly, obviously there's always a civil suit between the two property owners.
Okay.
And the town can also seek civil remedies as well, as your attorney, I'm sure, can tell you. But I represent a lot of towns, and I've sought a lot of civil remedies in my day.
Okay, thanks.
We've never had to do that, at least that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So I do have a couple of follow-up questions. One is the undetained stormwater, what is that coming off of?
So that would be areas other than the driveway or the roof that we can't control in the post-developed condition.
So just like sidewalks, or I'm not sure what.
There would be a small amount of sidewalk, but it would be the grass area would be the majority of what that would be referring to in the post-developed condition.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess the other question I want to ask is, I'm not sure if you're aware, but similar to the neighborhood character zoning changes that were made recently that you agreed to comply with, even though your application came in before that was put in place, there's also some stormwater regulation changes being worked on in the town right now for redevelopment sites that would be more stringent than the standard that your design is trying to address. And basically, the idea is that Princeton is already pretty much built out, and that so much of it is old enough that we don't have any stormwater mitigation in place for probably 80% of the properties in town. And so we're actually going to be requiring mitigation of existing, impervious as well as the newly created impervious. And I'm wondering, especially, for some of the same reasons that Louise was talking about, we know that the 100-year storms are coming about every 3 years now. That we would really like to see more capacity in these stormwater systems than is currently strictly required by the ordinance. And I'm wondering whether you would be willing to increase the standard that you're designing for in terms of detaining stormwater on site.
I think practically speaking, we're limited with the single-family minor subdivision with no real improvements. If there was a roadway proposed with this, I'd say maybe we could increase the pipe sizes or the detention basin. But really, when we put the roof leaders into the ground, that's really about all that we can capture. The roof is the roof. Otherwise, we're proposing additional infrastructure.
Right, but the size of the seepage pit that you have is only handling the 25-year storm, which I assume is coming about 3 times a year. Couldn't that be increased in size?
As you obviously you've thoroughly reviewed our report, so there is a small amount of runoff for the 100-year storm. We could upsize it to contain the entire 100-year storm for the roof. I mean, that'd be a step in the right direction. That would exceed your current standards, but maybe not be up to your redevelopment standards.
Okay.
So, I mean, what that means, in your calculations, you've used about 4,000 of existing impervious, which is about 10% of the entire lot. And what we're asking is that you don't use that 4,000, that you use the entire acre lot as you know, whatever the natural conditions are. So it basically probably increases the size of your rain garden or your dry well.
I'm getting a very hearty yes from my client in the back. So yes, we
That
would
would
do
make me happy.
Your happiness is our sole concern.
I think another thing, in addition to increasing green infrastructure, stormwater retention, is decreasing the amount of impervious surface. I don't know why the K-turn on the driveway is needed, but that pretty much is a third of the driveway. And I think that you could easily just smoothen that out like a typical driveway into the garage.
Well, we've reviewed that, and it's something that our client takes very seriously. The issue is, especially on Snowden, while not a really busy road, it's a somewhat busy road. I mean, as I said, I've got family right on there. I go up and down it. You've got the bike path right there and those kinds of things. To have a car back out into a bike path onto a semi-busy road doesn't make a lot of sense to my client, my engineer, and so forth. So that's the need for it. We're going to buffer it. We are going to compensate for that K-turn. And the same thing for Weed Chief. You've heard from the residents there that this is a road that a lot of people like to walk up and down on. There are no sidewalks there, so people walk the road. And again, you want to be able to have those cars be able to turn around so they're facing out as they back out. I mean, cars are getting better. If you have a newer car, it may have one of those sensors that will sense people or cars coming on, but most cars do not have that. And it just is, from a safety standpoint, makes a lot more sense to have the K-turn.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of get that for Snowden. I'm less so on Weed Chief, but
It is something that we've put back and forth, but we believe that safety is probably the most important issue there, especially given the character of the neighborhood and what you want to see, how you want to see people interact with each other out there. I don't want to talk like a planner. I have my planner here. He can speak to that better than I can, but that was the debate that was going on amongst us.
It's a trade-off between safety and impervious coverage. And safety is probably more immediately needed.
Yeah, it would be a minor decrease in the impervious coverage, and the little kick out that you get would provide a better safety situation.
I just know about that because I experienced that a lot when I'm backing out of my
car. I have a straight driveway.
I
have a straight driveway as well, and I have an older minivan, and I don't have those sensors. And there are days. There was somebody running, and I didn't see them the other day, and thank God I was going really slow. So it's something, I live in a very dense area as well, and it's very similar to this, and it's something I'm very sensitive to personally. I wish I had that kick out.
I mean, I get the argument. I just think that if we're talking about impervious surfaces and
absolutely,
stormwater,
and we're very sensitive to that. You've heard us testify. Not only are we going to comply with the stormwater regulations, you just heard us testify that we're going to even increase our ability to take in water from the roofs.
I got another sort of a general question, and it may be maybe outside the scope of the application here, but this issue came up a few times during our discussion tonight. Just hearing from our local environmental groups, when you hear someone say we've had 300-year storms in the last 20 years, obviously the numbers have changed. And I'm not sure, I was going to do the research on it, just haven't had a chance to do it yet. I'm not sure where the official numbers come from as to what is a 2-year storm, since in the last 2 years we've had more than a 2-year storm. Right. And to follow up with that, I was wondering from staff if there's anything in our ordinances, which I have not had a chance to look at, to see if there's anything in there that triggers a change of what the standard is for, if we have 300-year storms in the last 20 years, obviously that's no longer a 100-year storm. And so the question is, whatever that formula is that calculates what's a 100-year storm, since the math has obviously changed, is there anything in our ordinance that triggers a new definition of what a 100-year storm is? And if if we're doing analyses based on, like, the stormwater analysis based on numbers that obviously aren't correct anymore, how do we deal with that if the whole point of having the study is to protect people from stormwater problems?
So the shorter answer is no. Our ordinance don't allow that, or don't account for that. Those numbers are, I believe they're established by DEP. I know DEP uses them. I don't know if it's the
Office of Emergency Management,
where they
and
actually
stuff like that,
come
so I'm
from,
not
but
sure.
it's numbers used by DEP. We've adopted the DEP ordinances, so obviously we use the same thing. Interesting question. I don't have an answer for that part of it, but I mean, what Princeton has done to try to at least offset that is the stormwater ordinance we did for the minor developments last year. That most towns don't have that. So, and prior to a year and a half ago in the township, you didn't have to do any stormwater management on a single family home. So now you do anytime you add more than 400 square feet. What we're looking at doing this January or February is what we're calling the redevelopment ordinance, and that's where you don't get credit for when you tear down an existing house, you don't get credit for that impervious surface. So we're looking at other ways of making our ordinance stricter without dealing with those numbers. I am working with the university, and we're trying to determine not so much the 100-year storm, but the smaller storms, that when you get an inch, 2-3 inches of rain in an hour or two, that's something that's happening a lot more. And that's what's causing a lot of our flooding problems, is the short duration, high intensity storm. So we're actually working on a study with the university and Joe Scoopy, and our stormwater expert, just trying to come up with some data on that to see what's really happening there. But so to answer your question, no, we haven't looked at changing the numbers. I'm sure that will happen. It happened, I don't remember how long ago, but 5-10 years ago, DEP did up the numbers. The 100-year storm used to be 7.5 inches of rain. Now it's 8.3, 8.4. So periodically they do update them. They probably are due for another update, though.
And we are obligated to go with DEP standards. We can't go above and beyond.
No, I believe we can go above and beyond.
Okay, we can. Okay, because if we can, I think it would be great if we had some sort of formula that once we
I think that's the
know what
problem
actually happened,
is coming up with that formula.
Yeah.
I think it would. You can't just arbitrarily pull a number out of the air. So I think
Right, it
you would
wouldn't
have
be
to do a lot
arbitrary,
of
but I'm saying we could
you have
have
to
the
do a lot of
formula
research
and-
as to
and-
what that really
right.
is.
I'm saying the factors from the formula can be what actually happened. What
Right.
scientifically we measured, and then we plug it in, and then we know what the new numbers, new results should be. Right.
Okay. Ms. Ullman?
Well, I'm awfully glad Dwayne asked that question, because I don't think I would have known any of that interesting stuff you just told us. You should report every so often on what you're doing to make things better for us. I think that's great.
Sorry to give you more work, but
We're going to have
But I
Mr.
think
West
it's needed.
teach
It's
a
necessary.
stormwater seminar after this session is over, so
Yes, we did.
I believe you are correct.
Okay. Could I just ask, since the old-fashioned problem in the Wheat Sheaf Lane area is the wet basement and so on, are you planning to put basements in these structures?
Yes.
Yes. And you feel that these calculations will keep them from being retention basins?
Yes, and prior to construction, we'll do soil logs to ensure that the groundwater, that the basements are above the groundwater level.
Say that again, that the basements are above the groundwater level?
Yes.
But you know you can't lift the buildings too far out of the ground. That's one of the neighborhood
and-
character
Right,
requirements.
and there are regulations with regard to that to prevent us from doing that, yeah.
Correct.
We
Understood.
don't want floating houses.
Okay, your planner is also here. Did he have a presentation?
He is available. He can just summarize what he was already testified at our last hearing if you would like him to.
Okay.
We also have the elevations here and the floor plans.
Do you want to see them?
I'd be glad to hand out the floor plans if you'd like to see them. We also have the elevations.
Well, I think they're,
Since you brought them, why don't you hand them around? But
I mean, the board asked that we bring them, so I brought them. It's
Yeah.
up to you.
I think as long as they have them and the public would like to see them, we might as well
that'd be great.
have them.
We're going to mark these as A5A, which will be the elevation for one of the houses, and A5B will be the floor plan for that house, and A6A will be the elevation for the other house, and A6B will be the floor plan for the other house.
I haven't gotten that far.
Okay, let me hand out these floor plans. Hold on one second.
There we go.
Thank you. I apologize. I'm passing out. All right, I'm going to just give you the whole pile. It's 1 and 2. What you have up before you right now is the elevation that has been marked in as A5, and then the floor plans are signaled at number 1. Those are A5.
So A5A is the elevation, A5B are the floor plans.
A5A is the elevation. A5B are the floor plans. They have a number 1 on them.
Now, Mike, are these actually associated with Wheat Chief and Snowden, or?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So
Very good question. The elevation we have in front of us here, this is the Snowden elevation. As you can see from the Snowden elevation, and I have my client here. He's more of a, as you know, he is the builder. He knows more about this than I do. But you can see the cultured stone, the architectural accents, and so forth on this house. Then the next elevation is the elevation. Jim, if you could switch it, is the elevation on Wheat Sheaf, which again, trying to fit in with the nature of the neighborhood, is a little bit more understated home with the front porch and again the architectural accents.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Still hasn't switched on our screens.
You're right. Now
There
it
it
has.
is.
Now it has. He's a planner, so you know we have to give him a little bit of time. I'm married to one, so I can say that.
And Mike, you have the floor plans for the Wheat Chief
That
house?
would be. It would show number 2. That
Oh,
would
that's
be.
number 2.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would be A6B are the floor plans. They have a number 2 on them that were passed out. Does everyone have them? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I don't have number 2.
Oh, there were like 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yeah, we got one of
Like a second.
Oh. Do you have more copies, Mike? Or maybe there's more down
I
there?
gave you all the copies I have. I apologize if it wasn't enough.
Jerry,
No, that's,
Do you, Eileen, could I borrow your copy for a minute?
I think we're okay, Mike.
Oh, we have, are we okay?
Yeah.
All right, 1 and 2, all right. Mr. Kyle is here if you have any questions of him. Or I also have my client here if you have any questions with regard to the elevation and the floor plans.
would just comment, I like the sensitivity to the Wheat Chief facing unit. I think it's
Yeah, my client has been out there. He can testify to if you want, but he's been out there. He really took into account what things look like out there to make sure this house fit in with it. And again, for Snowden as well. You know, Snowden is an important artery. You want to have a good-looking, tasteful house pointing out on that.
Yeah.
He has a lot of experience building homes similar to these and has an excellent reputation north of here.
No, I agree that it is very sensitive to the size difference in the neighborhood. You know, the house that's there now was part of a different development. It was not part of the Wheat Chief
Right.
development. It was an earlier development, so. That was on Snowden. This is all part of the Princeton Prep School land developments.
Right.
So.
No, it is a beautiful area, and hopefully we have two beautiful homes here that will assist in the continued character of that neighborhood.
Okay. Yes. All right. So why don't we open up the meeting for comments from the neighbors or the people who've come to listen to this? And could you, if you could come up, you'll have to speak right into the microphone so we can record it, and give your name and your address. About 3 minutes per person or so.
Yeah, and when you come up, if you could indicate whether you've been previously sworn in. If you have not been previously sworn in, I will swear you in.
I'm Jane Manners. I was previously sworn in the last hearing. I live at 61 Wheat Chief, and I'm sorry that I sent an email to one of your members. I wasn't sure how to get information in front of the planning board, and I recognized Jeff Oakman's name, so I emailed him, but he didn't write back. And then I called Eileen, and she explained to me that there are strict regulations for how you guys can hear and receive testimony and documents. So I apologize for screwing up the regulations. What I tried to share with you was an email that I sent to Steve Fox, the developer, outlining some of the concerns that my neighbors and I discussed when we met. There are 7 of us here, and there were 8. One had to go pick up her son at soccer, but I think that in itself testifies to how tight-knit our street is, A, and B, how much we care about preserving the character of our neighborhood. And you hear character of neighborhood a lot, as I have come to learn, in these sorts of procedures. But to me, what that boils down to is a kind of intimacy among neighbors that is in large part achieved by scale, which is something I actually was surprised I didn't hear the board ask questions about tonight. So the scale of our street is what I wanted to talk about, and I have a not very cool something to share with you, which is
you have to be on the microphone so you're recorded. Thank you.
I will walk it over in a minute, but what it is printouts of photographs of the houses on our street, beginning with the house at 29 Snowden, to give you a kind of fuller sense of what our street looks like. It is overwhelmingly kind of humble cottages. Very few of us have garages. If you do have a garage, it's only a 1-car garage. The average square footage is 1,910 square feet. The median is 1,894. So you can have a sense that this is a pretty modest, humble street. And I think that is in large part a reason, the small lots and the small houses, why we are as closely connected as we are, why we are such a tight-knit community. And that is what we hope to preserve. Now, when I wrote to Steve, I outlined 4 concerns that the neighbors had.
Before you go there, we'll mark that as the photographs of the houses on Wheat Chief as Exhibit 01.
Okay.
And then if you could give that to me when you're finished.
Yes, in fact, if I could, I'd like to, can I hand it to Greg and have him look at it and then pass it down the row?
Sure, absolutely. And also, I'm sorry, you gave two averages. The first was 1,910 square feet.
That's right.
And what was the second?
It was the median, and it was 1,894.
1,008.
So
what does that
pretty-
what does that represent? The 1,894.
That's the median square footage.
All right, thank you.
So as you can see, they're pretty much identical and they're small. So when I wrote to Steve, I mentioned that we, the neighbors, had gotten together for wine and snacks to talk about this and see what we should do, and we agreed that one of the most important things was a conservation easement, which Louise suggested at the last planning board hearing. We were very happy to hear that that was part of the plan. I do notice that on the plan that was presented earlier, the trees that are going to be preserved are actually not the tallest, most impressive trees on the property. Those trees are, in fact, all, according to the plan, all going to go away. There are trees that are currently in front of the 29 Stoughton lot, if you're looking at it from Wheatsheaf. Now, I understand that Steve wants to put his house where those trees are, so some of them have to go. But one of my questions would be, could some of them be preserved? Because they are clearly the tallest, most water-sucking up trees on the property. My second question is, part of the reason this elevation looks great is that there are trees behind the house, but if you look at the actual plan, there are no trees behind the house. So could there be some preservation of trees behind the Wheatsheaf house and perhaps behind the Stoughton house to give it more of a wooded feel, again, in keeping with the neighborhood, and what Chris Cosenza described at the last hearing as a kind of wooded gateway to the neighborhood. We are also concerned about impervious surface area. We all have basements that flood. And to that end, I wrote to Steve about perhaps minimizing the garage, making it a one-car garage versus a two-car garage. Steve was not interested in doing that. When I didn't know there was a K-turn, I too am concerned about the K-turn from the impervious surface area perspective. None of us have K-turns on our driveway. So I recognize the safety concern, but I also have a kind of environmental concern. And along with it, those sorts of questions goes the width of the driveway, right? A two-car garage makes the driveway wider. The third thing I wrote to ask Steve about was a street elevation, including the houses on the side, so you could really get a sense of the scale of this house in comparison with the scale of the others. Few of our houses on our street even have second floors. So again, there's this kind of question of consonance with the neighborhood that we would like to see attended to. We do appreciate the attempt to make the Wheatsheaf Lane house comply to a certain extent with the character, but we'd love to see even more. So yes, I guess those are my concerns, the concerns that my neighbors and I discussed, questions we have about ways this plan could be made even better to preserve the trees, preserve the character of the neighborhood, preserve the scale. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, there was just one statement made by Ms. Manners with regards to statistics. She's using statistics for something, part of her argument. And if the board is to take into account those stats, I would just ask that I know the source and be able to reference whatever that source would be.
Sure. Ms. Manners, Mr. Herbert is entitled to cross-examine you, so he can ask whatever questions he wants. Mike?
Zillow.com.
I'm sorry?
Zillow.com.
Zillow.com.
That's where I got the square footage for all the houses on the street.
And I would object to the use of Zillow.com as for any consideration in this application.
Are there other sources?
They are net, it's a net opinion of a website that sells houses.
I'm sorry. Okay. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? You're a wonderfully attentive audience. Are you sure you don't want to say something too?
Hi, my name's Terry Adams. I live at 74 Wheatsheaf Lane. I'm down at the end of the street on the cul-de-sac, and I was not sworn in before. I couldn't make the...
If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
So sworn or affirmed. Please state again your full name and spell your last name.
Terry Adams, 74 Wheatsheaf Lane. I've lived there for 19 years, and when I first got there, I think we had some hurricane had occurred the year before we moved in, and the homeowner said that her basement didn't flood, which was really fabulous because we're right on Harry's Brook. 2016, I had more than 18 inches of water in my basement because in July of 2016, we had a rainstorm that flooded many of our homes, and it hadn't happened prior to that. And in that time frame, there were lots on Nassau Street that were mowed down. Trees were mowed down to put up enormous homes. And across the street from us, a home was put up where trees were taken away. And I think many of you know that a 100-year-old tree absorbs a heck of a lot more water than a new 6-inch round tree. So even with the development of these properties, if they're going to put up new trees, it's going to take us 50 years before those trees are going to be as effective as the existing trees on the lot. So I'm happy that the houses that they will build may not have water in their basements, but I'm down the street. And so the effect of the land that's being covered by this house, these two houses, the driveways, and the lack of trees may not impact these two new homeowners, but I would guarantee you they're going to affect me. They're going to affect many of these neighbors who live on the cul-de-sac or off the cul-de-sac because the water runs down. And the town itself is not dealing with storm runoff as they should be. That's a different issue. But for our street, I think approving homes to take up the amount of square footage on a lot while taking away trees, large base trees that absorb a lot of water, is only a disaster waiting to happen for us who are still living there and hope to live there. And I just am really, I'm not opposed to development, but I am opposed to development without realizing the effect of mowing down a lot with really old trees sitting on it that are helping us prevent flooding in the homes that many of us live in. So I just appeal to the board to consider that. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Can I say something about the 100-year-old trees? The one thing that I do know about this area, the Princeton Prep area, was it was 62 acres. It was sold at auction in 1939, and all of the shrubbery was sold at the same time. And so there are pictures of it, just sort of nothing. So if you've got really big trees, they have to be sort of after 1940 in that area. So
Okay, so they're 80 years old.
Hmm?
Okay, so they're 80 years old.
Right, but it's a pity because it did have really beautiful shrubbery before that. Anyone else want to comment on the public part, or shall I close it?
I just want to make one comment about Mr. Herbert's comment that he thought the use of the Zillow data was a net opinion. I don't agree with that. I think it's a legitimate source and the board could consider it.
Well, I would beg to differ.
All right, let me close the public portion. Board, did you have any further discussion or items?
I guess I just want to ask one clarifying question based on the comment that we just heard. Is it the engineering, our engineers and the applicant's engineers' judgment that this lot soon, or these lots will generate less stormwater runoff, substantially less stormwater runoff post-development, taking into account current wooded/forested land cover, than they currently do. Is that?
I think I'd like to sort of say that that's the wrong question for two reasons. One is that the applicant's engineer has already represented that he was going to go back and check what type of vegetative environment was used in the calculations. So without knowing the answer to that, I mean, I would, one of the conditions that I would like to impose if we were to approve this would be to say that the vegetated state of the lot pre-development be different from the vegetated state post-development, that it would be an unwooded lot essentially post-development because we are taking down so many of the mature trees, and see how that impacts the calculations. And then the other piece is that the applicant has already agreed to abide by the even stricter standards of the redevelopment stormwater regulations, and that
such that the 100-year storm is retained on site?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that should really improve things.
That should improve things. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry, they were kind enough to go through the staff memos and mark what they had agreed to and what they still differ from. Is there anything else that we should ask from those?
I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be asked. Obviously, at the time when we have a board deliberation, I'll go through proposed conditions, and the board will make a judgment on that if they're going to approve the minor subdivision and variances.
Did you? I think in that case we should have board deliberation, and Louise has begun by asking one question. So, anyone else? Anything that you need clarified or would like to discuss further?
I'm just going to throw this out there. It's one additional idea that came up actually at the end of the last meeting, which was if you were to subdivide these lots slightly differently, such that the one fronting on Snowden was conforming and the one fronting on Wheatsheaf was slightly smaller than it is currently, that would help a little bit with the scale disparity that the folks on Wheatsheaf are concerned about, because the house that would fit on that lot would be perhaps a little bit smaller. I'm curious whether there might be any interest in entertaining that kind of a modification.
It is, when you look at that, the change would be so slight because the variance we're applying for, while not de minimis, I'm not going to argue again with Mr. Mueller, but it is a minimal variance, so that if you did do that shift, I don't believe there would be much of an impact upon the size of houses. That was my understanding. And again, I'm just the attorney.
David, it also may trigger another variance for lot depth or lot width, where both lots are 100 feet in width, and that's the requirement. So if you took some from one and put it on the other, it would create another variance.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Ms. Ullman?
I guess in my thinking, it's the environmental concerns that take priority here. Wheatsheaf Lane has been a huge problem for as long as I've lived in Princeton, so I know that it's going to continue to be a problem. I think the applicant has done a pretty good job with a certain amount of pressure to moderate that. As to the question of scale, I mean, when I've gone up and down Wheatsheaf Lane a couple of times, there's every design of house you can imagine over the last, what, I don't know how long, 50, 60 years. There's no one design that characterizes any of them. So I guess that my thinking is that these two new houses are at the end of the street. Only one is on the street, the other is facing out. I think the house on Snowden seems probably a little more appropriate to the Snowden. I do think the house facing Wheatsheaf its size is going to show up a lot, particularly at first as the house sort of blends in. But I think it's a well-designed, good-looking house, and I guess I would be in favor of approving this, recognizing the validity of the neighbors' feelings, and but I don't think we can. I mean, in the future, some of your houses are going to be sold, and probably somebody's going to come in and do something that's even more, that's even worse than this. So I think they've made, the applicants made a good effort to design good-looking houses in a modern style and a modern size. They have the right to make a house that will sell and that meets our standards of height, width, and everything else. So I would be in favor of the application as it has been negotiated here.
Yes, I would like to say also a little bit more about the scale of the Wheatsheaf houses. You know, there is variety, even though there are a certain number of one-story or story-and-a-half houses. But there's also the beginnings of replacement. There have been a couple of these that have been replaced in the last 15, 20 years. And the Wheatsheaf houses really are, it's a wonderful period in building in Princeton, because these were immediately post-war. They're starter houses for young families and so on. When I looked at the lists from the 1940s, I could see people who started here and ended up in Edgerstone in 20 years and so on, plus the fact that there a number of architects built their first houses here and then moved on to other projects and so on. So it's, I think there was one house on here, and I've forgotten which one, which had won an AIA prize for a simple house in a country setting. But this is, you know, this is something that we need to look at. These are also just barely post-war materials. They may not last forever, although the design is better than the materials. So I sympathize, because the fact that these were young people building houses and living together give it that intimate feeling that you all value. But at the same time, things are slowly changing, so that's enough. Well, the fan is, I am using my microphone.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear you. So
The
still
public
allowed to
session
speak?
was ended.
Are we still allowed to speak?
no, the
No.
public
No?
portion is closed. Anybody else? Yes, David?
Yeah, I just want to mention that another condition that I would like to include, that I think was part of what was sort of negotiated tonight, was that those two trees that are in that side yard area be preserved, because of this concern about the impact of loss of the mature trees on stormwater, and that regrading as necessary to make them viable should be one of the conditions.
Any other conditions? Anyone? Okay, Jerry, I think we're probably at that point. Does somebody want to propose a motion or not?
I'll move to approve with the conditions that we've discussed this evening.
Okay, do you want me to go over the conditions?
And I'll
Oh,
set
oh, I'm sorry.
to get
Sorry.
around the
Yeah.
voting.
You want to go over those? We had a second.
Okay, yeah. So let me go over the conditions. It'll take a few minutes. I'm going to start with an email from Chris that was responded to by Mike Herbert, and then go from there to the reports and the response to those reports by somebody in Mr. Hopkins' office, Jonathan Demora, and then go to my notes last. In terms of the comments by Chris and response by Mr. Herbert, first comment was on whether the conservation easement could be widened. Mr. Herbert indicated that in the view of the applicant, it could not be widened because it would eliminate a considerable amount of the outdoor space that would be usable. If anybody wants to talk about it, obviously they can. I'm not at this point listing anything as a condition because I haven't heard anything indicating that it should be widened. Then the second is regrading at the. Eileen, you cannot hear me? No one can hear me back in back. No. Can you hear me? Jeez, I'm right up against this. Yeah. Is that any better? Yeah. Okay. Let me. That's right. I'm okay now. Just starting over. I'm going to start with Chris Cosenza's email to Jack and Derek, and the response by Mike Herbert. The first point that Chris made is, could a conservation easement be widened? Mr. Herbert indicated that it, in the opinion of the applicant, could not be because it would intrude too much into outdoor space. I'm not going to make that a condition unless board members want to talk about that and do something with that. The next one is basically to minimize the grading at the corner of the proposed lot 4.02, and the applicant has agreed to that. Then the next one is the boulder retaining wall should shift closer to the property line. That way, if any fencing is installed, it can be incorporated. It can incorporate the boulder wall at a logical location, and that was agreed to. The driveway turnarounds, Chris suggested that be eliminated. The applicant would not agree to that. I'm not adding that as a condition, but obviously the board can talk about that if it wishes. Next is a private walkway should be shown between the public sidewalk and the main entry for lot 4.01 on Snowden. That was agreed to. The paver pad for the trash recycling will need to be extended to connect with the driveway, and the applicant agreed to that. Then going to the memos by LRK and by Jack and Derek, and there was a response to that in a letter dated November 20th. First, in terms of Jack and Derek's report, the first point deals with roof leaders, and some pump discharge for both lots must be tied into the municipal stormwater system. Given the revised plans, Jack, do we need that condition?
They will tie the sump pumps in. Is that
Right. Are the plans sufficient in that regard, or should we add that as a condition?
That should be a condition.
Okay. Then 2 is compliance with the stormwater management requirements pursuant to section 227.2. That's been agreed to, and that will make that a condition. Pins are shown to be set at the new property corners of the new lots. Setting
Mr.
those
Coleman, just remember the stormwater agreement. Also, we are going to expand our roof leader portion. So we're not only just complying, we're going beyond complying.
Yeah, right. And I'll get to that when I get to my notes. Then the pins are shown to be set. This is number 3. That's a condition also, Jack? Correct.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. The addresses. Is there anything on the plans as to that, or should that be a condition? That's condition 4.
It should be a condition.
Okay. And then descriptions of the new lots to be submitted to the land use engineer in terms of approval of the property description, and the deeds would be approved by me. That'll be a condition. The applicant should provide the engineering department with the following. One corner of the plat should have horizontal coordinates and vertical datum based upon municipal monumentation when the subdivision is approved. Now the applicant indicates that that information has now been included on the plans.
Same thing, though. I think all of those, I would prefer to see them
Okay.
actually as a condition,
Conditions anyway? Oh, yeah,
even
that's
though they're on the plans, but just
Sure.
so it doesn't get lost.
Right, we're going to comply with everything that's in Jan
Okay.
and Derek's memo.
Then no tree removal without the filing and approval of a tree removal permit, a tree location plan to be submitted. That was indicating which trees to be removed, although that's been done. As per Jack's request, I'll add that to the plan as well. And it also provides that there should be snow fencing at the drip line. All utilities to be installed underground. Again, I think that's shown in the plans, but we'll add that as a condition as well. Following approvals required, Mercer County Planning Board, which is correct. And Jack, they indicate that the DNR Canal Commission approval is not required because of the extent of impervious cover. Do you agree with that?
We can verify that.
Okay. So I'll make it a condition to be, just to be verified. In no case shall the driveway for either lot be closer than 5 feet from the property line. We'll add that. Although one of the conditions will be that they'll locate the houses in accordance with Exhibit A4, which is what they submitted today. You agree with that?
And on that exhibit, it does show it. Like I said, more conditions you have, the
Yep.
better control
Yep.
we have.
Yep. Okay. Road opening permit required for any work done within the public right-of-way. Cash performance escrow must be posted. And as Mr. Herbert indicated, the applicant agrees with all of these. Then the next one, number 13 of Jack's, is basically a plot plan requirement. The improvements on the individual lots shall be subject to site plan review approval by the municipal engineer, including but not limited to a number of items, tree locations, protection measures, and removal, erection of soil erosion and tree protection, fencing, the location of driveways, utilities, and soil stockpile locations. In addition, existing grading and proposed grading for each lot is required to comply with Mercer County municipal code requirements as to tree replanting. Next, tree protection detail shall be revised to provide for wooden snow fence. I think it already has been, but we'll add that. Then the driveway apron detail shall be revised to 8-inch thick concrete. I think that's been done, but I'll add that anyway. Proposed house on lot 4.01 be moved further south to limit the amount of disturbance and utilize existing driveway. And that new location will be subject to the...
That one you don't need because when they redid the plan to flip the lots, that took that condition away.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Then with respect to Chris Cosenza's report, okay, the first one is preservation of existing trees. And I guess we just should have that trees should preserve to the maximum extent possible. Is that, Jack, is that a fair way of describing trees? I'm on Chris's report, the first item where he makes a recommendation is 5.1, preservation of existing trees. And I'll put in the condition that says the applicant should maximize preservation of existing trees to the extent feasible.
Yep.
Okay.
Can we be more specific then? I mean, I think we identified 2 trees.
Yeah, and I will get to those.
I just think, to the extent feasible, even practicable.
Or how about maximize tree preservation, period. I will have a separate condition on those 2 trees, and I'll get to that. We'll just say maximize tree preservation. Then the next one is preservation of existing grades, and I think that condition should be minimize grading, regrading. I don't know if you want to say to the extent feasible.
Yeah, I think there was another condition that we were going to add, that the grading will be, will be minimized, and I think
Okay.
that's in David's concern with those 2 trees in that area. We can cut back the grading so it
Yep.
doesn't impact
Okay.
those trees.
So we'll have a general one on minimizing grading, and then we'll have something specific on that.
Yep.
Okay. Now, 5.3 is the applicant should consider shifting the proposed dwellings further south away from Wheatsheaf Lane, but has that already been addressed by the new plan? This is Chris's 5.3?
I think that's been addressed with the new
Okay.
plan.
And then he has a number dealing with the neighborhood character ordinance. The first one is, in addition to shifting the proposed dwellings, well, we're not going to deal with that. Ensure the distance between the overall finished grade along the front of the dwelling and the first floor, the first floor finished floor elevation does not exceed 4 feet. I think the applicant agreed to that. Ensure the height of the proposed dwelling is being measured from the overall level of finished grade or pre-construction grade, whichever is lower. I believe the applicant agreed to that as well. For the corner lot, relocate the garage to the opposite side of the dwelling. That's been done now.
That, because when they flipped it, I
Yeah.
think that comment goes away.
Okay, right. And then for the proposed interior lot, so what would, that's the Wheatsheaf lot. Shift the garage back such that it will be recessed behind the nearest portion of the principal structure. I think they've agreed to that, and the plan showed
they've
that,
done that, yep.
but I'll add that anyway.
Mm-hmm. What number is he on?
Then ensure a minimum 10% of street-facing walls consisting of windows and doors, except for garage bay doors, which will not include in that 10%. I'll add that. Ensure a minimum of 5% of side-facing walls consisting of windows and doors, except for garage bay doors. Add that. Narrow the driveway to 10 feet at the property line, and that's been done. And then it fans out to 22 feet. Okay, recommend that a paver pad be provided along the side, and we already have a condition on that. But located in such a manner that the containers would not be located in front of the garages. It's further recommended that foundation landscaping be extended around the paver pad. The majority of such landscaping should be evergreen to ensure a visually impervious screen throughout all 4 seasons. You agree with that?
We typically don't have a requirement for landscaping around the house, but I think I don't think the applicant has objected to that. So
Well, this is just with respect to the paver pad.
Mhm. I put it in as a condition.
Yes,
Okay.
we agree.
And then the condenser units, it's recommended that the AC condenser units be located in the side or rear yard areas, not any yard abutting the street. It's further recommended that the foundation landscaping be extended around the units. The majority of such landscaping should be evergreen to ensure a visually impervious screen throughout all 4 seasons, same kind of condition. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. And then lighting, full cutoff fixtures be utilized so as to preserve and protect the residential neighborhood by minimizing adverse impacts such as glare and light pollution, as well as promoting dark skies initiatives. So that's all in the reports. Then just going through my conditions that I've noted, or possible conditions. Okay, one of them was complying with the stormwater regs, but we've already dealt with that. Now, we wanted 2 different designs. We've got the 2 different designs, but those are, I'm going to have a condition that those are going to be the designs that in fact will be used, right? And that's A5 and 6 to be, A5 and 6 to be complied with. Then we wanted to consider front porches, but they've really addressed that in their design, so we don't have to put that in. And then we'll move the Snowden Lane driveway to the other side of the house. That's been done, right?
What was that one?
We'll move the Snowden Lane driveway in the original plan to the other side of the house,
Yep.
but that's been, so we do not need that. Now, the conservation easement will provide, it'll be subject to the review and approval of the land use engineer, and it will provide for maintenance of the easement and of the bike path, which I take it is within the easement, by the owner of the lot.
The bike path actually, I believe, is within the right-of-way.
Oh, it's in the right-of-way?
Yeah.
But would the owner be responsible for maintaining that also?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an ordinance that
Yeah,
the town
okay.
has.
Much like a sidewalk.
Okay. We had talked at the first meeting about limiting the size of the house. The applicant was not amenable to that. If the board wants to discuss that, obviously that's its prerogative, because there are variances at issue. Then in terms of today's session, the grading for 4.02 to be worked out with staff, I think that's one that I've already indicated, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. A lot of these are already dealt with. Okay. The 2 trees to remain in area to be graded must be preserved. Then, and I'm not sure I got this right, the applicant will determine whether water retention from, well, I had the 18 trees, but I guess it's existing vegetation to removed is incorporated into stormwater management plan. If it is not, then plan will be adjusted to reflect this, and this will be subject to the land use engineer's approval.
So I think what the condition wants to say is that the runoff coefficient for the pre-developed will have the site as wooded, and that...
Okay, wait, okay, go a little slow. Runoff, it's exactly what I was going to say, by the way. Yeah.
He had a really good rest at a Holiday Inn. That's why he's able to say
Okay, runoff coefficient?
The runoff coefficient for the pre-developed conditions will be considered as wooded.
For the pre-developed condition.
So just for some of the board members, what that means, there was a lot of concern that you're taking trees down and the trees absorb water. So the runoff coefficient is used to calculate how much water runs off the site. And there's different factors, whether it's a treed site, whether it's lawn, whether it's impervious. Obviously, the numbers are higher for impervious. So what they're going to be doing is they're going to actually take into account those existing trees in calculating the pre-developed runoff. So as trees are removed, the developed runoff number goes higher, and shows the increase in runoff, and that's all factored in taken into account in the rain gardens and in the dry well.
Okay, so it's the runoff coefficient of the pre-development condition will be treated as vegetated.
As wooded.
As wooded. Okay. Okay, and David, you had suggested a condition which I think is covered by what Jack just articulated. Would you agree?
So they've also agreed not to take into consideration the existing impervious coverage from the existing house.
And that would be part of that condition you just articulated, right?
Yes.
And David, you had made a recommendation as to a condition with respect to the stormwater calculations. Does this condition that's just been articulated by Jack satisfy you?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Next is the applicant shall evaluate whether the rain garden seed mix is appropriate, and there also should be larger plants in the rain gardens, and that's all subject to the review and approval of the land use engineer. There should be a maintenance plan for the rain gardens and dry wells, and there has to be access to the dry wells so that they can be cleaned out. And then I guess we should say this, although the ordinance already provides for it, tree replacement or contribution as per the shade tree ordinance. Conservation easement, we talked about, the township will be the guarantee, and the owner will be responsible for maintenance. Should I say anything about maintenance of the Snowden bike path, since it's not on the site? And the ordinance...
That's already covered by
yeah,
municipal
right,
ordinance.
exactly. Okay. Then we talked about using entire lots and calculating the stormwater management plan, but Jack, we talked about using the entirety of the lots in making the calculations with respect to the stormwater management plan, but your condition really covers that, so we don't have to do that
That's
either.
correct.
Right. Okay. Do we want to say anything about doing soil logs to make sure the basements are above the seasonal high water table?
Well, they will be doing them. It's not a requirement that the basement be above the seasonal high water table.
Okay.
I don't know that we have many basements in Princeton that are,
Okay.
but they have to take that into account in the design of their basement.
Yeah.
I guess my concern, Jack, is that one of the first items discussed was that the sump pumps would tie into the municipal stormwater. So, you know, if the basements are down into the seasonal high water table, we're going to have a lot of water going into the municipal stormwater system. Is that not a concern? And they represented that they would keep the basements out of above the seasonal high water
The
table.
problem comes, ideally, yes, you do want the basement above the seasonal high water table. You also have a condition where you don't want the house raised up high. So you're fighting the two things. By trying to keep it above the water table, the engineer wants to raise the house up,
Yeah.
but then we have a condition where they have to keep the house at the existing grades of the property.
But, I mean, there are workarounds. You can have a partial crawl space, or, you know, have a partial basement only in the areas where the existing grades have sloped off.
Yeah, I have no objection to that condition. I just wanted to make it clear to everybody that they raise the house up to get above the water table, then the house tends to sit higher on the property. But I have no objection with that being a condition, if that's what the board would
But
like.
they still can't raise it up above where the ordinance says.
That's correct.
So it may be 4 feet. Is it 4 feet?
It was 4 feet, wasn't it, Jack?
I think it was 4 feet,
Yeah.
yes.
So is the board's pleasure to add that as a condition?
I would like to put that in, that the basement floor would be above the seasonal high water table.
Anybody object to that? No, okay. A member of the public asked if trees can be behind the two houses can be preserved. Well, I guess we're requiring maximizing tree preservation anyway, so I don't know that that's necessary.
I don't know what trees are going to have to be removed in order to put these houses where they're shown on the plan. And this may be sort of an unrelated issue, but I do note that the house immediately to the east of the proposed dwelling that fronts on Wheatsheaf is very close to the lot line, and I wonder whether some of the tree replacement should be native evergreen trees along that eastern lot line, because otherwise that house is going to look like it is less than a stone's throw away. And the house immediately to the east is very close to the lot line, and the new house is going to be very close to that existing house. And I'm wondering if some of the tree replacement can and should be native evergreen trees along that eastern lot line, such that there is some screening and buffer between the two homes. And I don't know how the neighbor there feels about it, but if the neighbor wants, I think that would be a neighborly thing to do.
It's not a problem. I don't believe the applicant would object.
Okay. I'll put that in then. Do you want to have any qualification that says the neighbor has to agree to this, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Okay.
Unless the neighbor does not want it.
Okay. Okay, and then the point about the trees behind the houses. As I indicated earlier, we have that general condition that says maximize tree preservation. I think that really covers it. Would everybody agree with that? No one.
I mean, it's not going to accomplish the goal. Those trees are right in the middle of the new house.
Mhm.
I don't think there's anything you can do in terms of shrinking the house. I'm sure you can't move it forward because of the front yard setback. So
Right. Okay.
I think those trees are goners, unfortunately.
Okay. And then I have a note that the 100-year storm to be retained on site. Do we need that?
Well, they're going to meet our ordinance.
Okay, so I don't have to say that.
Yeah, they're not necessarily retaining the 100-year storm on site. They're
Okay.
meeting our ordinance, which provides for a reduction in the amount of runoff from a 100-year storm.
Right. And I think I said this earlier, but again, the 2 trees in the side yard area are to be preserved, and the regrading, they have to do the regrading as necessary to make sure those trees are preserved. And that's it.
Before we vote, is it possible to revisit anything? Is it possible to revisit anything still? I mean, I'm still unsettled about the scale issue. I mean, it seems like this is going to be much larger than pretty much every other home on Wheatsheaf. But also, I think that you know, in terms of impervious surface, I don't know how the rest of the board feels about the turnaround on Wheatsheaf, the K-turn, but I think that might help in terms of impervious surface. So, yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to add that. Oh, we have to, I guess, approve the conditions and then make. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think we should vote first on the motion, but then you can make a motion with respect to that.
Okay.
And we'll go from there.
Okay.
If you say vote first, that means we'll have to deny it first, right? Because if we
No,
vote-
yeah, no, I think
Just the
if
condition.
it's the pleasure of the board, you can approve it, but then there could be a subsequent motion to add what Zenon was referring to as a condition.
Okay.
So add a condition after we approve it, you're saying? Yeah. Oh,
With a subsequent motion.
okay. If it's approved, I'm saying.
And just so we understand down on this end,
Yeah.
it's not easy to hear. It's true. It's not easy. The condition is to remove the K-turn thingy on the driveway, the house that fronts on Wheatsheaf, but not the house that fronts on Snowden. Is that correct?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Right.
That maybe we discuss as a condition.
But that's not part of the vote.
But it's not a motion and it's not a condition yet.
Yeah.
Correct?
Right.
Okay. Okay.
You've all heard the conditions as Jerry read them out. And are you ready to vote on that? Okay, do you want to call the roll, please?
Mr. Cohn,
Yes.
Mr. Stakowitz,
Yes.
Mr. Texarney,
Yes, I guess.
Mrs. Ullman,
Yes.
Mr. Williamson,
Yes, with the same concerns about scale.
Ms. Wilson,
So yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Gunning.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
Okay. Now, Jerry, since you
So can I make a motion to discuss the condition, another condition?
Yeah, I think the probably best bet is just to articulate it as a motion to add as a condition the requirement that the K-turn for the lot on Wheat Chief be eliminated.
And Madam Chairman, I have to object to further motion that the matter has passed. I don't, it's sort of, I don't understand the order here. I've done this a while. I don't understand a motion to amend at this point under the rules.
I think you could do it. I mean, we could have done it a different way by adding that condition early on. It seemed to me more efficient to do it this way.
I'm just placing my objection on
Okay.
the record.
So can we talk about, I mean, I don't know how other members of the board feel about that, but I mean, I just wanted to see if it was a case closed or if that's something that the applicant be willing to do.
Again, we just had an approval of a certain design. Now you want to change that design by this amended motion, which changes the application. I again don't have you know, I have an issue with the process, but my client has just notified me that he will take out the kick out on Wheat Chief if that satisfies.
Okay. I mean, then can we add it as a condition? I mean, I just you know, I guess I didn't mention it before, and we kind of went into conditions, and I didn't want to interrupt during.
Well,
the
you did
condition.
raise the issue of impervious cover. It's fair.
Yeah. But I kind of didn't
so-
pursue it as a condition.
It's not that we all necessarily agree to that, you know, because I personally would prefer safety, just knowing from my experience of backing out. So,
I mean, there was a motion. Then is there a second to the motion? To add the elimination of the K-turn on the Wheat Chief lot to the resolution?
I mean, I would second it. I mean, I think that Wheat Chief is a low enough traffic volume on that street that it's not much of a safety concern there. And if the applicant is amenable, which it sounds like he is, I'll second it.
Then are we good? Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess I'm not going to harp on the scale issue. I don't think we're going to be able to change much now at this point.
Yeah, don't go there.
Won't go there.
Just so I understand, this is a motion to amend the previously approved application to take out the K-turn kick out on Wheat Chief. Is that my understanding of the motion? Okay.
Okay. I'm ready.
You know, and again, you heard our arguments with regard to keeping it. Hopefully, they just keep that in mind.
Mr. Cohn,
Yes.
Mr. Stankiewicz,
No.
Mr. Texarney,
No.
No, you just voted against your own motion?
Oh, sorry, that was my motion. I thought we were voting for the applications. I'd say yes. Yeah, for sure.
That's the funny thing.
Sorry.
We already voted on that.
Mrs. Ullman,
Interesting.
Mrs. Ullman,
Yes. Objectionably.
Mr. Williamson,
No.
Ms. Wilson,
Yes.
Mrs. Gunning, motion carried. Motion carried.
I think there's some confusion on the scale side. But
Thank you, board members. I really appreciate all your time and efforts in this matter. On behalf of my client, I want to thank you all. Have a very happy holiday. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and this is one of the more interesting meetings I've been to. So again, thank you for my education, my further education in the stormwater field. And I wanted to thank again the expert, your town experts, especially Mr. West, who was beyond helpful. So thank you again, and hopefully have a wonderful and happy holiday.
Thank you. Wanda, do we have to carry the other application? Okay. Okay. Can I move to adjourn? No? Eileen said.
Thank you for all that you.
I don't know if you heard. We need to accept jurisdiction on PDS and that it's carried to January, so there's no further notice required. And we do have the extension to the January meeting.
Do we need a
Okay.
motion?
This is the second application on the agenda. This is Princeton Day School. It's to be carried to January 17th. It's an amended major site plan with a variance, and the board needs to accept jurisdiction on this. So,
I move we accept jurisdiction.
I second the motion.
okay, and I guess we can do a voice vote on that, Eileen. Yeah. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
When I looked at